When I received the invitation, it felt both ordinary and strange at the same time. I had known him for years, a figure who carried wisdom in his eyes and quiet authority in the way he spoke, but it was unusual for him to ask me to come over specifically and to be alone. His house stood at the corner of the street, old yet dignified, with tall wooden doors that creaked as they opened. I hesitated on the threshold, wondering why I had agreed so quickly, but something about the tone of his voice had drawn me in. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was trust, or maybe something far deeper that I wasn't ready to admit. He welcomed me with a gentle smile, one that immediately disarmed my unease. The living room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. We exchanged a few casual words, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual, as if he was searching for something unspoken. Soon, without much explanation, he asked me to follow him. My footsteps echoed against the floor as we walked down the narrow hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly. Each step tightened the anticipation inside me. Where exactly was he leading me? The door he opened revealed a smaller room, almost hidden from the rest of the house. It wasn't dark, but it carried an intimacy that the open living spaces lacked. A large chair stood by the window, the curtains half drawn, allowing only a muted light to spill in. A few framed photographs hung on the walls, reminders of memories I wasn't a part of. He gestured for me to sit, his voice calm yet firm, and I obeyed, though my heartbeat quickened. I couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't as casual as it seemed. He sat across from me, his gaze steady, almost studying me. At first, we talked about simple things, weather, routine, family obligations. But even in those small exchanges, I felt something simmering beneath the surface. His compliments slipped into the conversation with such subtlety that I almost missed them. The way he said I looked different today, the way he noticed details about me that others usually ignored. It was not the kind of attention I expected from him, and yet it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt for a long time. The silence between sentences grew longer, filled with unsaid words. My eyes drifted around the room, trying to distract myself, but they kept returning to his face. There was a warmth in his expression, a familiarity, and yet a strangeness too, as if the boundaries of our relationship were quietly shifting. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into his tone, but deep down, I sensed where this was leading. When he leaned slightly closer, the space between us seemed to shrink dramatically. He spoke softly, his voice almost a whisper, as if afraid the walls themselves might carry our words away. I nodded mechanically, not always registering what he said, because my thoughts were tangled in the feeling of being here, with him, alone. It felt wrong, and yet undeniably thrilling. My conscience tried to pull me back, reminding me of the ties I already had, the commitments that should have anchored me. But the air in that room felt heavy with temptation, and resisting it became harder with each passing moment that I noticed small details I had ignored before. The slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes lingered too long, the quiet pauses he left in conversation, as if inviting me to fill them with something more than words. My chest tightened, and a strange warmth spread through me, the kind that only comes when you stand at the edge of a line you know you shouldn't cross. That I tried to steady myself, asking harmless questions, pretending that this was still an ordinary visit. But even my voice betrayed me, softer, more hesitant, carrying emotions I couldn't completely hide. He seemed to recognize it, and instead of stepping back, he leaned into it, gently but unmistakably. It was no longer just a simple meeting. It was the beginning of something unspoken, dangerous, and yet magnetic. As the minutes passed, I realized that the decision to come here had already changed everything. The room, the silence, the way his eyes held mine. It all felt like a prelude to a secret I wasn't sure I was ready to keep. And though nothing had been said outright, both of us knew we were walking into a story that would not end without consequences. The hours seemed to slip quietly into one another as I sat there, my nerves wavering between comfort and unease. I had always thought of him as distant, a presence that stood apart from my own world. But in that moment, he felt startlingly close, almost too close. His voice had softened into something personal, no longer the casual tone of an elder offering polite company, but the voice of someone intent on reaching deeper, brushing past the surface of ordinary conversation. He asked me questions that no one else thought to ask, about what I wanted from life, about whether I was truly happy, about the choices I had made that still lingered in my thoughts. His words cut gently but firmly, and though I could have kept my answers guarded, I found myself speaking with an openness that surprised me. Each confession seemed to pull me closer to him, threading a bond neither of us could ignore. It felt strange to lay parts of myself bare, but it also felt undeniably freeing, as though he had unlocked a part of me I didn't know I was keeping locked away. His eyes stayed on me the entire time, attentive and unwavering. It wasn't the look of someone idly passing time. It was the gaze of someone who cared to see every detail, every flicker of emotion crossing my face. That intensity both unnerved me and drew me in, as if I were standing at the edge of something vast, waiting to see whether I would fall. I caught myself smiling more than once, not because of his words alone, but because of the way his attention made me feel. It was intoxicating to be noticed so deliberately, so fully. At one point, his hand brushed against mine as he passed me a glass of water. The contact was brief, but my skin burned with the weight of it. I tried to laugh it off, tried to dismiss the reaction as nothing more than a slip of the moment. But inside, something stirred. I could tell he sensed it too, though he didn't make a show of it. Instead, he let the silence stretch, allowing me to feel the pulse of my own heartbeat in my ears. That silence said more than words ever could. The conversation meandered, but always found its way back to us. Our lives, our regrets, our unspoken desires. I realized that he was carefully guiding me, not forcefully, but with a patience that was almost disarming. He didn't need to push. He simply created a space where the boundaries blurred on their own. A part of me wanted to resist, to remind myself of all the reasons why this was wrong, but another part whispered that maybe, just for once, I didn't have to. When he leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on mine, I felt the pull stronger than ever. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker, as if the entire world outside those walls had fallen away. I wasn't thinking about the consequences anymore, not about the tangled web of connections and trust that stood behind me. I was thinking only of the way he made me feel, alive, visible, desired. And in that awareness, I could feel the edges of my resistance slowly fading. That he spoke again, this time in a voice lower than before, almost as if it were meant only for me. He told me he admired my strength, my honesty, the way I carried myself despite the challenges I faced. Compliments like these should have felt ordinary, but in his tone, they became something else entirely. They slipped under my skin, leaving me flustered and warm. I found myself lowering my gaze, only to look back at him moments later, as if drawn against my will. The closeness was undeniable now. His presence filled every corner of the room, and though we sat apart, the space between us felt fragile, like it could dissolve at any second. I wanted to say something to break the tension, to restore the balance, but no words came. Instead, I stayed quiet, allowing the silence to stretch once more, knowing full well that silence was exactly what he wanted. It was in that silence that something shifted. Not a grand gesture, not a sudden move, but a subtle change in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that we were no longer merely talking. We were circling something far more dangerous, something both of us were aware of, but neither dared to name. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing against me, the knowledge that whatever happened next would cross a line that could never be undone. And still, I didn't move away. I sat there, heart racing, breath shallow, watching him as he watched me, both of us balanced on the edge of something that promised both ruin and exhilaration. And though nothing had yet been spoken aloud, I already knew that we had stepped into a secret that neither of us could escape. The moment stretched between us like a delicate thread, thin enough to break with the smallest gesture, yet strong enough to keep us bound in its tension. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the silence louder than any words. I could see in his eyes that he was waiting, not forcing, but leaving the door open, knowing that I would either step through or turn away. My mind screamed of boundaries, of the promises and loyalties that tethered me elsewhere, yet my body betrayed me. Leaning ever so slightly closer, drawn to him as though pulled by gravity, he shifted in his chair, and with that movement came a closeness I could no longer ignore. His hand rested just inches away from mine, steady and patient, as though offering without demanding. I looked down at it, at the veins tracing his skin, at the quiet strength it held, and then back into his gaze. Something inside me trembled, not out of fear, but anticipation. My fingers twitched, betraying the battle within me, and before I could stop myself, they brushed against his. It was the smallest contact, but it felt like crossing a border I had spent the entire evening trying not to acknowledge. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. Instead, his fingers wrapped gently around mine, warm and certain. My pulse surged at the touch, every nerve in my body suddenly alive. I knew then that the line had been crossed, that what had been simmering unspoken was no longer deniable. A flood of thoughts rushed through me. Guilt, desire, fear, excitement. But they tangled into one indistinguishable current, carrying me forward whether I wished it or not. The words we exchanged after that were softer, hushed, almost confessional. He spoke of loneliness, of yearning, of choices that had left him with more silence than comfort. I found myself answering with truths I had never admitted to anyone, confessing how I felt unseen, how my heart longed for something more than routine, more than duty. Our words intertwined like whispers in the dark, each one pulling us deeper into the space where only we existed. Then came the inevitable moment when words no longer sufficed. He leaned forward, slowly, giving me every chance to stop him, to pull away. My breath caught in my throat, and though I should have turned my head, should have broken the spell, I stayed perfectly still. The closeness overwhelmed me, and when his lips finally met mine, the room seemed to spin. It was not a kiss born of innocence, but one heavy with everything unsaid, with longing and hunger that had been held back too long. My heart pounded so violently I thought he must hear it, yet I did not pull away. The kiss deepened, tentative at first, then bolder, as though each second of hesitation gave way to the certainty of desire. His hand moved to my cheek, steadying me, while my own hand clung to his shoulder as though seeking balance. Every thought of consequence dissolved in that moment, replaced only by sensation. The warmth of his breath, the taste of his lips, the way my body melted into his without resistance. It was reckless, dangerous, and yet I had never felt more alive. Time lost meaning as the embrace lingered. Each heartbeat seemed to carry us further into forbidden territory, and yet neither of us resisted. It was as if we had both surrendered to something greater than willpower, something inevitable. When finally we pulled apart, breathless and shaken, I could hardly meet his eyes. The weight of what we had done hung heavy in the room, but so too did the undeniable thrill of it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. My fingers still tangled with his thumb brushing lightly against my skin, as if to reassure me, to remind me that the step we had taken was real. I should have run, should have excused myself, but my body betrayed the truth my mind didn't want to face. I didn't want to leave. He whispered my name, low and tender, and in that sound was both a question and an answer. I felt the sting of guilt gnawing at the edges of my chest, but it was drowned out by the surge of desire that demanded more. When I leaned into him again, it was no longer hesitation that guided me, but choice. The world outside that room ceased to exist. All that remained was us, two people caught in the storm of something forbidden yet irresistible. And as his arms pulled me closer, I knew there was no undoing what had begun. We had stepped fully into the secret, a secret that would bind us in ways we could never admit to anyone else. When I finally left his house, the night air felt colder than it should have. The streets were quiet, the world unaware of what had just taken place behind those closed doors. My footsteps echoed faintly as I walked away, each step heavy with the weight of secrets I now carried. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm the storm inside me, but every thought circled back to the same memory, the touch of his hand, the warmth of his lips, the undeniable truth that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The guilt came quickly, sharp and piercing, reminding me of everything I had betrayed. Faces flashed in my mind, people who trusted me, who would never imagine that I was capable of such disloyalty. The promises I had once made felt fragile now, paper-thin compared to the intensity of what had just happened. I hated myself for giving in, and yet, buried beneath that self-reproach was another truth I couldn't deny. I had wanted it. Every second of it. The walk home felt endless, each street lamp casting its accusing glow on me. I wondered if it showed on my face, if anyone passing by would somehow know what I had done. My heart raced with paranoia, but beneath it all was a strange calmness, almost satisfaction. For the first time in a long while, I had felt truly alive, seen, desired. That thought both terrified me and kept me from collapsing under the weight of shame. When I closed my door behind me, I leaned against it, shutting my eyes as memories replayed in fragments. The way he had looked at me, the trembling in my hands, the silence that had held more meaning than words ever could. I tried to tell myself it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But the truth pressed heavily against my chest. It hadn't felt like a mistake in the moment. It had felt inevitable. The days that followed blurred into one another, but the secret followed me everywhere. In conversations, I found myself distracted, replaying moments I shouldn't have. When I smiled at others, it felt false, a mask hiding the turmoil inside. Even in the quiet of the night, when I tried to sleep, the memory of that room haunted me, pulling me back into the same forbidden closeness. I told myself it was only once, that it wouldn't happen again, but even that reassurance felt hollow. The way he had looked at me, the way I had responded, I knew it wasn't over. Every time I thought of him, my chest tightened with both dread and longing. I should have cut the thread immediately, erased any possibility of it happening again, but the pull was too strong. The secrecy made it more intoxicating, more dangerous. The more I tried to resist, the more I felt myself drawn back to him, as though a part of me had already surrendered completely. And yet, I couldn't escape the fear of consequences. What if someone found out? What if the truth unraveled, shattering the fragile trust that others had placed in me? The thought of losing everything was unbearable, but so too was the thought of giving him up. I lived in the tension of both, torn between what I knew was right and what I secretly craved. One evening, as I sat alone with these thoughts, I realized something that unsettled me even more. I wasn't sure I regretted it. Guilt weighed heavily on me, yes, but regret was something else entirely. When I searched my heart, I found a dangerous honesty there. I wanted more. That realization frightened me, because it meant this wasn't simply a moment of weakness. It was a choice that in the quiet, I admitted to myself that the story we had begun was not finished. Whether it ended in disaster or secrecy, I couldn't pretend that what happened in that room would simply fade away. It had left a mark on me, one that no amount of denial could erase. I didn't know if I would return to him, if I would allow myself to fall deeper into the affair, but I knew the temptation would always linger, waiting for the right moment to pull me back. The night we crossed that line had changed me. It had shown me both the depth of my vulnerability and the strength of my desire. And though I wrapped myself in silence, pretending outwardly that nothing had happened, inside I knew I carried a secret that would forever shadow my every step. A secret that belonged only to us, hidden but alive, beating quietly like a second heart I could never silence.